Employee 73, 6F, 63, 72, 61, 74, 65, 73, designation auditor, recording from workstation 6C, 69, 6D, 62, 6F. The date is October 29th, 1079 AB, and I am continuing my ongoing investigation and document review of the ill-fated 7th expedition of the SD Catabasis. For an initial summary of the case, please consult SDK REP01 or the initial burst transmission titled SDK Burst 001. In the interim between the submission process of my initial report and this report, I have attempted to run an automatic sorting algorithm on the Catabasis's black box. Its exact parameters were set to scan through the black box's root file system and sort through its directories for pertinent files. It would then create a list of these files by date, sorting from the 15th of March, 1078 AB, or the date in which the journey began, to the 25th of December, 1078 AB. This auto-sorting algorithm was successful, as it did indeed create a list of usable files ranging from the oldest to the newest within the dated parameters. However, there was a considerable amount of corruption present within the file system which the algorithm couldn't account for. As a result, we have a partially incomplete list of dated files and a large amount of corrupted files that need restoration. I have already viewed the uncorrupted files, and from a brief read-through, I can find nothing disputing our initial summary of the case. Therefore, I'm going to assign my assistants, employee 48, 65, 73, 69, 6F, 64, and employee 47, 6C, 61, 75, 63, 6F, 6E, 20, to work on fully analyzing the uncorrupted files beyond simply skimming through them. They will also be responsible for creating a working timeline, though I suppose that may have to wait. Regardless, I will work on restoring any corrupted files, since I have the most experience with our outdated and oftentimes esoteric file system. Once a file is restored, I will examine whatever is recovered, be that audio, image, or video, and provide analytical commentary at key points. Commentary will be clearly delineated from file content, with the statement auditor's note being used before sections of commentary, and the statement file begins or file continues being used before content from files. I will then date the file, place it into our ongoing file chains, and examine how it fits with the case as we understand it. I see no reason for further preamble. We will begin our investigation by examining the first file I was successfully able to restore. I am marking it as RF001 for the time being, until a better name can be ascertained. File begins. Personal log, Crewman 007, Percival. Designation, Systems Engineer. ID number, 49 6B 61 72 6F 73. Date, 1078 AB, June 14th. Time, 1901. Log start. Auditor's note. From the header, we can ascertain that this is Percival's personal log, which must have been backed up from his personal workstation onto the ship's black box. Already, I can find two things worth noting. One is the date, which is June 14th, 1078 AB, which would place this log as a day before the destruction of the comms array on the Catabasis. This means the file could offer us an important insight into Percival's condition, and give further evidence of his unstable mental state that predated the array failure. The other thing of note would be Percival's ID number. In the recovered crew manifest and every document we have, Percival's ID is always listed as 49, 63, 61, 72, 75, 73. But here writes it as 49, 6B, 61, 72, 6F, 73. Ultimately, this was a simple two-letter difference, a K and an O replacing a C and a U. But it stood out to me as aberrant. I will instruct my assistants to keep an eye on ID numbers to see if any other inconsistencies rear their heads. File continues. Hello, future Percy. It is I, your past self. I'm here, as usual, to make sure you remember stuff. Auditor's note. Apologies for stopping the file so soon, but I would feel remiss if I did not point out the strange framing device of this log. Most personal logs are typically dated and then include a summary of an employee's day, with the employee giving their personal thoughts and feelings about said summary. Some employees do add a Dear Diary to their log, but I have never seen Percival's way of framing before. Uniquely, Percival has framed this log as a letter to his future self to help him, quote, remember stuff. It could simply be a cute mannerism, or it could point to a way that Percival views himself, that he does not view himself as a continuous entity, but rather separate instances, a past, present, and future person that exists independent of one another. Also of note is how he ends the framing device. As alluded to earlier, he ends the framing device by stating that it is here to help him remember things. Oh, my apologies. Stuff. How wonderfully inspecific. Specificity notwithstanding, it could point to a history of memory issues. Those issues are not uncommon with people sporting Percival's high-grade neurological augmentation. Or it could possibly be the way he rationalizes his separate instances, though at this point the separate instance analysis seems to be on the verge of psychobabble. Still, I will keep this framing device and Percival's possible separate instances in mind when examining the rest of the passage, however tenuous the connection appears to be. File continues. Anyways, I just got off work. Feels good to finally be done. It's been a long and hard work week, let me tell you. There were so many maintenance requests. Our life support system has been on the fritz ever since we took off from Sarah's, so I've been consistently monitoring and repairing that. Couple that with the fact that both our climate control system and our generators all decided to collectively crap the bed, all while Linnaeus was constantly bothering me to fix his goddamn miniaturized arboretum when I'm quite literally trying to save everyone's lives. Yeah, you can see that I had a really stressful week. At least it's over now. The climate control system and the generators weren't that awful to fix, and as always, the life support system was a bitch, but everything is mostly functional aboard the ship. I even had time to fix Linnaeus' stupid plant terrarium thing. Turns out that moron was pumping in 2 times the amount of carbon dioxide than was recommended. Actually, calling him a moron isn't fair. He's fairly intelligent, and he seems nice enough. He just cannot take a goddamn hint. Even when I told him to leave me alone, he just kept chatting at me. Most days, I'm actually cool with him following me around and talking. I mean, it fills the air with something other than the screech of the Omni Welder or the repetitive clicking of keys on a system terminal. But this week, I don't know, it was different. God damn it. I really should apologize to the guy. I know I fixed his terrarium, but I was really rude to him. You know what? I'll synthesize some algae for the miniaturized aquarium he's working on. That'll be a good way to smooth things over. That and a heartfelt apology. That's what we're working on in therapy anyway. It's just stressful being on this ship. Everything is breaking all the time. Elsie is always on my ass. Her supervisor is always on her ass. And my dad... Well, Dad hasn't spoken to me since he gave me this job. I've tried calling him, but every time I look at his contact information, something just stops me from calling. I should probably call him. At the very least, to check up on how Mom's doing. Last I heard, she was still hospitalized. You know what that means. No calls in or out. Strict medical isolation. Auditor's note. This passage, in particular, stands out to me as it helps substantiate my initial theory of the case. We can clearly see that Percival is struggling with his role on the ship. He finds the amount of maintenance to keep a craft like the Catabasis running daunting and stressful. In his own words, he had a stressful week where he had to consistently monitor a variety of near-broken systems. Percival's mental state could not have been helped by his family situation. As revealed by the passage, Percival's mother was undergoing strict medical isolation for some unspecified sickness. I cannot corroborate this, as I do not have immediate access to patient records. Furthermore, I do not know which hospital Percival's mother was, or still is, staying at. I will inquire further into this, starting with a search for any patients in SD hospitals with the last name. However, if we take Percival at his word, the survivor's narrative becomes even easier to believe. It's trivial to see that the underlying stress of having a family member in the hospital and the evident stress of work would have predisposed Percival to a psychological breakdown when the ship became totally isolated. I would love to end the analysis of the passage with that simple conclusion, that if we take Percival as 100% truthful, his log substantiates and strengthens the survivor's account. However, that would be disingenuous, because this log reveals something else that is highly important to the case, that being Percival's relationship with Abraham Linnaeus. From this log, we can see that Percival was spending a large amount of time with the man, and would arguably consider him a friend, or at the very least, a trusted colleague. After all, if he hated Linnaeus, he wouldn't go through the effort of apologizing to him. This close relationship is odd, and direct conflicts with the testimonial given by the survivors of the Catabasis crash. They all characterize Percival as incredibly withdrawn, polite, but never forming close bonds with anyone on the crew. They said that Percival's habits of self-isolation grew even stronger after the failure of the comms array, but did in fact exist prior to the system failure. Perhaps they didn't know about Percival's relationship with Linnaeus, though that feels implausible given how small the ship was. Most of the crew would have been elbow to elbow with one another. They would know if Linnaeus was talking with Percy. If we uncover more instances of Percival forming bonds with the crew, I will be sure to note it, but I cannot yet justify labeling the testimonials as false because of one possible friendship. Though it does cast doubt. File continues. Enough of that, though. I've got something interesting to tell you. When I was doing work on Terminal 4E4958, I picked up an incoming transmission from... The internal ship sensors had gotten to it by the time I was there, leaving not much left of it, but I was able to piece together that it was essentially like a prayer for liberation. Someone named Nix, funny coincidence, seemed to be imprisoned and was crying out for their kids. She wanted her kids to come home to her and free her from her confinement within. This prayer was told through an underlying allusion to the Minoan parable. It was really touching. I almost cried after reading it. Now, I have no idea if this is some elaborate prank or some new ARG that some dead-end streamer came up with, but color me impressed. I mean, they had to pull some really old names up from the old web for a transmission that had no guarantee of being received. Whoever this was created a real work of art here. Let me pull this up real quick to show you what I'm talking about. Wait, what the hell? Things changed. I don't know how this happened, but something about this has definitely changed. My copy is a private physical backup. I saved that to a piece of hardware completely disconnected from our subnet. How the hell are there new images on it? And where's the passage about the death? A work of art, he says. Regardless, I was wondering when the phantom transmissions would make their appearance. To be direct, I do not believe that these files ever existed. Rather, they were apparitions, created by an addled mind. It appears that even Percival initially agrees with me, as in this passage he was skeptical about their veracity. It is my opinion that Percival slowly discarded this correct belief, as the stress of his situation began to set in. There are a multitude of reasons why I don't believe these files exist. The survivor's account verifying that they never found the files on the workstation, and the lack of any recorded transmissions within the black box being my chief influences. However, the linchpin to my argument is that Percival's copy of the transmission seemingly changed when he opened it, with new images being added and passages being removed. This is simply impossible. The only potential explanation I can think of is that someone with administrator-level permissions was altering Percival's files in real time. But again, that is impossible. If Percival did indeed create a private backup on his own personal workstation, which, ignoring the fact that these transmissions do not exist, and that such an action is a blatant violation of company protocol, it would mean that those files should have been completely inaccessible by an outside administrator. I actually have experience dealing with this. One of my first cases involved me tracking down a corporate espionage ring within SD, whose primary means of exfiltrating data was through private backups onto near-ancient hardware. What made the case difficult is that once the original was copied onto hardware, the copy became untraceable, meaning the administrators could not manage clearance levels or information. So, to reiterate, what Percival alleges is physically impossible. Once that phantom file was copied onto his personal hardware, it would have been impossible to alter by an outside force, meaning that either he altered the file and forgot, or that file was a complete delusion. Because I largely believe these files to be complete delusions, I will not be engaging in any serious factual analysis regarding its supposed content. I will not be trawling through our records, looking for any mention of Nyx or any other chthonic god from old Earth. I will, however, examine this file as a reflection of Percival's psyche. From the limited information that Percival gives us, we can understand that he believes this file to be a plea for liberation from an imprisoned mother figure known as Nyx. Nyx cries out to her missing children, pleading for aid, begging for them to come back to her, to rescue her. I believe that this is Percival's subconscious reflecting on his feelings towards his mother. As mentioned earlier, Percival's mother was in strict medical isolation when he was writing this log. According to Percival, this meant that no one was allowed to see her. Effectively, she was confined to a single hospital room. This, when viewed with poetic license, could be seen as a prison of some form. Since she is his mother, Percival would feel a duty to her, to help her with her pain, to free her from her prison of sickness. Couple that with homesickness, and the prayer begins to make sense. Percival is casting his mother as a god, longing for her child to come home and free her. He is essentially telling himself that he shouldn't be here, that he's needed back home, and should feel guilty. He's created a self-flagellation ritual with this transmission, regurgitating themes of his own personal guilt in an effort to destroy himself, or at the very least, decouple himself from reality. File continues. Something's wrong here. Why is my log self-censoring? Come on, Percy. Think. Pull yourself together. There's gotta be a rational explanation for this. There's gotta be a way to figure this out. To understand how my own personal logbook is being altered. Come to think of it, some of the codes and classifications have been weird recently. Maybe I'll start digging there. I'll try the usual stuff. Then I'll input all the names from the transmissions. Following that, I'll see what I can do. Me, man. I'm both scared and excited. To think I was just gonna clock off this weekend and watch some idiots beat the at each other in Blood Ball. I'll be back again, future Percy. Hopefully with more answers. Oh, and remember to take your medication. You don't want to be forgetting anything important again. File end. Auditor's note. I had to censor a certain unfortunate word. It seems our chief engineer had quite the mouth on him. More important than profanity and blood ball is that it appears the pieces of Percival's summary of the phantom transmission, such as the name of Nyx's children, have indeed been completely redacted prior to my accessing of the text. I've tried using my bathysphere level permissions to unredact the text, but it appears to be mostly unsalvageable, aside from a scant few lines. I have attempted to reconstruct those sentences as best as I could, and that is what you heard me read. In the log, he claims that this is caused by a self-censoring protocol that was somehow affecting his private backup. This self-censoring protocol, much like the phantom file being altered by some outside force after it had been copied, is patently absurd. In all my 13 years of working within the company and its information systems, I have never seen or heard of a self-censoring protocol. I know that some auditors will create algorithms to help censor certain words in their written reports. However, these are highly situational and do not self-activate. Rather, they require the user to authorize their use by running the program. Therefore, the only logical explanation I can find for the censoring of this log is that Percival censored it himself, and is either deliberately lying about it or simply forgot that he was censoring the log. Considering the fact that Percival had no motivation to lie on his personal log, It leads me to believe that the latter is far more likely than the former, given that a chief engineer like Percival would have to write reports of every repair he made. That he would have some sort of censoring algorithm would make sense. It would be plausible then that Percival simply forgot that he activated an auto-censoring algorithm when he was dictating his log. The method of medication, specifically in the context of its treating spells of forgetfulness later in the passage, further solidifies this theory. As I mentioned earlier, employees with Percival's extensive neural modification have been known to have memory issues. It's the price they pay for their increased cognitive output. It is standard procedure for these employees to be issued a cocktail of drugs known as lethe. The cocktail consists of our pharmaceutical wing's proprietary mood stabilization and psychotropic relief mixture, which includes such drugs as rivastigmine and donepezil. These medications not only help employees with neurological augmentation maintain normal mood patterns, but it also assists them in remembering information that they need to do their jobs. Lethe is an incredibly effective drug. However, it does require those taking it to not miss doses. Our pharmaceutical wing has found that if an employee misses a single dosage, their memory becomes scattered, and the employee is left in a state of paranoid confusion. If Percival was indeed taking this medication, perhaps he missed a dose before writing this log. That would explain the fear exhibited in the passage. Furthermore, the ending statement of forgetting anything important again implies that Percival has indeed had an incident prior to this of forgetting something. Whether he is referring to the initial incident that got him suspended from the company, or a time when he forgot his medication, is uncertain. However, the possibility is there. In my professional opinion, it is seeming more and more likely that Percival forgot to take his medication before writing this log. There is an old Earth adage, coined in the time before the Great Broker, stating that, of two competing theories, the simpler explanation of an entity is to be preferred. I believe that this adage adequately explains how this file fits into the overall case. If we take a look at this log, at face value, ignoring Percival's mental instability and unreliability as a narrator, what do we have? Some powerful unknown entity sends out a strange transmission to a random ship engineer on a simple surveillance mission. This unknown entity then proceeds to breach past not only the ship's security system, but the laws of physics, to update a copy of its transmission on an external piece of hardware which, mind you, is isolated from the ship's subnet to further torment this random engineer. Finally, in a bid to completely break this poor unfortunate engineer, this malevolent presence hacks into Percival's log to make it censor everything it said to cover its tracks so it can, I don't know, further torment him in complete anonymity. From its face, we can see that this order of events is incredibly convoluted and requires a serious suspension of disbelief to be viewed as credible. In this telling, there is a complete lack of motivation for this faceless sender to use its near supernatural powers. Couple that with the multiple reality-breaking phenomena occurring within the passage that have never been before observed, and we have a completely unreliable narrative. In comparison, the explanation that Percival, an employee with known mental health struggles and memory issues, forgot to take his medication, and in a fugue state created or hallucinated a file, seems far more believable to me. There is a clear explanation for what happened, that being Percival's pre-existing condition, and there is a logical motivation for his writing of the transmission, that being an expression of his guilt and stress regarding his mother. This explanation has no reality-breaking events, no strange forces reaching beyond the veil and bending technology to their dark wills. Rather, it relies on simple human tragedy. It may be less compelling than a mysterious being calling out to be liberated from a celestial prison, but in my experience the mundane is far more common than the extraordinary. I believe that this file, when examined in totality, supports the narrative of the survivors. It illustrates Percival as an overworked and inexperienced man who is dealing with a highly traumatic situation back home. These factors, along with missing medication, led to him deteriorating mentally into the Percival who would crash the ship on the 25th of December. Of course, this is still a preliminary theory, and there are details within this file that do disagree with my reading, such as Percival's relationship with Abraham Linnaeus. There are also points of further inquiry that must be examined, such as verifying that Percival's mother was indeed hospitalized. As I continue my investigation into the catabasis, I will keep these details in mind. However, I'm going to end my report here. I will continue my examination into the black box's corrupted files as soon as I am able. This is employee 73, 6F, 63, 72, 61, 74, 65, 73, designation auditor, signing off. End log.